Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 107 of the White Knuckle Podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. What's up? Welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast. Tonight I am joined with Mr. Aaron Warbritton of the Hunting Public via Skype down in Iowa, I assume. Aaron, how's it going tonight?
Good, buddy.
Good.
Doing all right.
Good.
Trying not to melt.
Yeah, just before we pushed record here, we were talking a little bit about the weather. It's just, we're getting like a little bit of everything here. I'm just thankful it's not snowing and cold, so I'm glad I can wear shorts, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if the farmers are too happy at this point, but
boy, those poor guys are.
We're gonna get what we get when it comes to Mother Nature. We don't really have a choice in all that.
Nope. That's exactly right. Well, hey, we first of all, I guess before we get into anything specific, tell me what's new with the Hunting Public and what's going to be new for this year. What can we expect out of you guys this fall?
Well, we're trying to plan out a bunch of new trips this fall for the deer tour, going to new areas. We've had a lot of folks ask us about hunting in Michigan. We're thinking real hard about getting up there. Potentially at some point, we're going to hunt some new states early. Last year we went to Kentucky and Nebraska. We're going to hunt a new state to kick off the deer tour. I'm not really exactly sure which one yet. And, Jake also just drew a Kansas whitetail tag. So
sweet. We'll
be going down there at some point as well. So lots of new country on the deer tour this fall. We'll be hunting Iowa again and probably Missouri and potentially Nebraska, Ohio, Wisconsin, some of the same areas that we've hunted the first 2 years.
Yep.
But we're going to hunt several new ones as well. And then we're going to make another southern trip in January. Not sure which state. It'll probably be Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, somewhere in there. But we will be making the southern deer trip.
That was a fun series to watch with Zach going down there. And just really, it was tough hunting, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was super tough. And that particular area that we went to is one that we had all scouted and turkey hunted on before. So we kind of had a little bit of a leg up going into it. And we didn't expect, we were talking before they left on that trip. It was like any legal buck or doe for that matter is going to be in trouble if we can, get a shot with a bow.
Right.
And they ended up hooking up with Catman down there and our buddy Adrian. And I think between the two groups, they saw a handful of bucks. And Catman missed one, and Zach almost got a shot at a nice buck for that part of the world. So.
Yeah, it looked like every show it was crescendoing up to something good, and not that something good didn't happen. I mean, I'm sure they had fun and all that good stuff, but probably learned a ton. And it seems to me like those kind of trips really can stick with you in terms of improving your woodsmanship, improving yourself as a hunter. I think that there's much more value sometimes in not getting something and learning than there is in getting one on the first day or something like that. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, and that's typically how our 5-day out of state hunts go. If we're going into an area that we don't have a ton of knowledge about, pretty well blind, you'll see that a lot. It's like this stair-step progression. The first video, we're not even in the ballpark. We're having all these problems and all these issues, with camp, and that's kind of the thing. Once you go down there, you're all amped up to get out and go into the woods hunting, but you got to remember, like, you're going to a new area that you've never been in before. So you've got to think about the logistics of camping there, of getting all your right licenses and all that stuff. I mean, and figuring out which roads are open, which roads are closed, where you can even get a vehicle to. You've been doing all this map scouting, but then you just get pretty much thrown in a blender on the first day. And by the 5th, 6th day of the hunt,
right,
you're starting to put stuff together where you can get on, bucks. But with the areas that we previously scouted, though, like in Iowa or Missouri or something, a lot of times we can just go right in there and go straight to those spots and get on deer. But that's typically how the progression goes. Like you said, it's a crescendo type thing towards the end.
Right. Well, that segues pretty well into our topic for the evening, and that's trail cameras. And I know, if memory serves me correctly, Zach doesn't really use them at all. I think he's happy to take your information, it seems like, at times from them.
Yeah.
But you use trail cameras in a completely different way than what a lot of folks do. In that, we've spent a lot of time. Clint McCoy and I talked the other night about, how he uses them. We talked with a couple folks here, with a couple guys that I know down in southwestern Wisconsin, in, how they use them. And primarily it kind of goes like this. It starts out with, a summer inventory. And I think we've all decided after talking about it that, summer inventory is great, but it really is hopes and dreams, and until really October something, until you get some stability out of those deer and some, you get a relative or, several pictures of them. You're not sure that they're going to be around. You don't necessarily get the luxury in a lot of cases of, getting to take that summer inventory. I get in Iowa, you do to an extent, but not like I think a lot of us do. So what I'm curious to find out is, how is it that you are using trail cameras, whether it's now or in December or in November, whatever the case may be? How do you use them, start to finish? And then what do you do with that information? And I know that's a big subject.
Well, we almost always use them in some sort of a long-term educational approach. And occasionally, like last fall, I was hunting a specific deer a little bit. I did it a few times and I just got kind of bored with it. So I eventually, I didn't put as much effort into it as I probably could have. But regardless, I did run trail cameras for a specific buck in his area last year some. But for the most part, it's all a long-term educational approach, just to try to find out more so how deer and mature bucks use a specific area at specific times. So I guess what that said is, when we turkey hunt all spring, so we don't get a ton of scouting done in the spring, and we tend to start scouting in June. And okay. We scout a lot right now. We just spray down with permethrin and go out there and deal with the heat and the ticks.
Yep.
But when we're going right now, we're packing cameras with us. And we're usually hanging them in a staging area right off of bedding, or right in a bedding area, or maybe up closer towards a parking area to monitor pressure or something. I mean, whatever it is, we're always setting them up with a specific purpose in mind, trying to learn more about, I guess, the bucks and how they're using that area. And we usually don't check them very often. But like we'll set them up oftentimes right now, and we won't come back in there until Christmas to check them, or later than that. The only way we'll check cameras often on like more of a short-term plan is if we have them set up along the edge of a main feeding area on like a nocturnal scrape, or if we have them closer to a parking area where we're monitoring hunting pressure, someplace where you can get in and out of pretty easily, and in some place where you have no intentions of hunting. So, you know, you're not leaving scent anywhere close to those bedding areas that you're planning on hunting. And we will do that at times, where we'll check those like every couple of weeks.
Sure.
But the situation's got to be right, and it just so happens that on public land, those types of locations are where we're setting the cameras on the short-term side.
Yep.
And that's the way we separate it. It's kind of short-term and long-term trail camera strategy. With short-term trail camera strategy, you're setting them up in those locations where you're planning to check them every couple of weeks, like I mentioned. But they're also in spots that are very accessible, not only to you, but to other hunters. And those are the cameras that we see get stolen most frequently.
Gotcha.
Out on public. So, you know, we don't want to leave those things in accessible locations very long without checking on them, because
sure,
we don't want to get them yanked.
Yep.
But if we've already scouted the bedding areas in that particular location, we'll just wait to try to get, you know, pictures of a nice buck on that camera. And we may not know anything else about that deer because he's so far away from the bedding. But if we get a picture of a big buck at 3 a.m., for example, on one of those short-term cameras up on a field edge or something on a scrape, we can oftentimes backtrack them to a bedding area. We'll just start going down through the different bedding areas and hunting them. They may be nowhere near that camera, though.
So if I'm understanding what you just said correctly, you'll capture a picture during season of a buck visiting a nocturnal scrape. So he's using it at night, 3 a.m. It's pretty safe to say he's a long ways from bed. And how are you backtracking him? With a camera or no, not necessarily?
Not necessarily in those situations.
Okay.
We're just backtracking them because of our prior scouting or because of where we believe them to be bedded.
Gotcha.
You know, and oftentimes there's been numerous occasions where, and you asked, you know, what we're doing right now as well with cameras. We'll run them right now up closer towards those access locations, and maybe we're getting velvet pictures. I mean, you mentioned a while ago how, you know, seeing bucks this time of year is great, but it doesn't really matter all that much. And I would agree with that for the most part. Oftentimes I've ran cameras in one spot this time of year and got pictures of them clear up until September when the velvet drops off. And then all of a sudden you don't have anything on your camera and it's October 1st, you know, and a buck hasn't been there for a month. But what we found anyway is that they don't necessarily move too far. They're just switching within their range.
Sure.
You know, and in the absence of buck pictures is almost as important as the actual buck pictures. You following what I'm saying?
Yep.
Because when we notice that we're not getting pictures of a buck anymore, we know that he is shifted out of that specific spot.
Yep.
So for example, several years ago, we were hunting the buck nest and I had a camera placed 40 yards from the parking lot, and I'd been getting pictures of these velvet bucks all summer. And I went in there on October 5th, the first time Zach and I hunted it. We checked it, and there wasn't a thing on it for the last month. So we immediately went 600 yards deep into the back bedding area that we had scouted before. And we got set up, and we saw every one of the bucks that we had pictures of in velvet in one night. You know, but they were 600 yards from that camera.
Oh, okay.
And they weren't even getting to it, you know, in the middle of the night. They hadn't left the area. They had just shifted. After the velvet drop, they had moved bedding areas. So it was good to know that they were there, that they were in the area with the velvet pictures. But then we had to backtrack them into a different bedding area because there was bedding areas up close to that camera that we were getting pictures of them on when they were in velvet. But when the pictures dropped off, we just assumed that the bucks had moved. So we were just going to bounce to the next bedding area. And it just so happened it was about 600 yards back in there from the camera.
Okay. Have you found that your use of trail cameras has helped you predict to some extent what's going to happen with a particular area, just because one of the things that we got into, and let me back up a little bit, is that I believe that every farm, every property geographically, I mean, maybe not just, by boundary lines, but just by an area, it has its own DNA, so to speak. And that DNA, I think it precludes deer to acting a certain way based on pressure, based on pressure, and that means hunting pressure, farming pressure, your foot traffic, how, are people really using their property, things like that. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
And have you found that the use of them, or do you ever use cameras to I guess give you a little bit of an advantage in making, or in basically being able to ascertain probably what that deer's next move is going to be based on historical data that you've gained over the years?
Oh yeah, and that kind of plays into that long-term trail camera strategy. Like right. I said, if we're scouting bedding areas right now, and this is the time of the year, when we're doing our scouting, where we're picking trees, we're picking, ground setups, a lot of that stuff when we're scouting these bedding areas right now. Mm-hmm. And we'll hang a camera right in there where we won't check it until we go in there to hunt it, or we won't even check it at all. If it's right close to the center of the bedding area, we won't check it at all until after Christmas. But we learn so much from those cameras soaking there all fall. Mm-hmm. It's just insane because you can see the progression, the natural progression that these deer go through within this bedding area for 6 months. And you'll see peaks and valleys in there of, mature buck movement. But for example, you may have a camera hanging up in that bedding area for 6 months, and you may not start getting pictures of a mature buck in there until the 15th October. But then you may have him in there 2 or 3 times a week for the next 4 weeks. And then maybe he drops off, towards the end of November. Sure. Well, that just tells you right there that he moved in there for the rut, and he was in that general location for, the end of the pre-rut and then going into the rut itself, and then he left.
Right.
And then when you come back around to hunt that area the very next year or the year after that, you can anticipate that sort of movement. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, we see that often.
And I think, a trail camera isn't necessarily, the only or the best way to do that. I mean, just being out in the timber is always helpful. Having boots on the ground, that kind of thing, is super helpful as well. You can't do everything from the couch, I guess. But, one of the things that you mentioned is getting in close, in the bedding areas. And, when I talked with Clint, and the guys from Wisconsin here last week, it seemed like everybody was sort of apprehensive to get too close. How apprehensive are you at getting too close? Doesn't sound like you're apprehensive at all.
No, we're super aggressive, and we are on public or private, doesn't matter. But people kind of see us going into these bedding areas and spooking these bucks and stuff and think that we're kind of reckless hunters. But the fact is that we'll go into a bedding area once and we will blow it up. Like, for example, I'm going to scout this next week and I'm going to go into some new spots. I'm going to walk right into the middle of those bedding areas and I'm going to completely leave my scent everywhere. I'm going to blow it up. I'm going to leave a camera in there. I'm going to try to pick setup locations for different scenarios throughout the fall. And it's going to take most of the day to scout that bedding area. But then when I leave, I'm not coming back there until it's time to go in there and try to kill a buck. And depending on the size of the bedding area and what we can get away with as far as accessing it to hunt it, we may only go back in and hunt that thing one time.
Sure.
So yes, it is super aggressive, but you're going in there twice in a year.
Right. It's not like you're
and that's it.
Going and having a picnic twice a week.
No. And what we noticed is mature bucks are fine with that. I mean, they'll blow right out of there and they'll come right back. It's no big deal. What the problem is, and it doesn't matter if it's in the bedding area or if it's on the edge of the bedding area or the whatever you call it, the outskirts of the property, wherever you're consistently leaving your scent is where they are not going to be, especially during the daylight.
Gotcha.
So even if you're hunting around the outskirts somewhere and you're going to the same spot over and over and over again, unless you're getting dropped out of an airplane and landing in the tree, you're leaving your scent on the way to your stand location, and they know what your access route is in there. They're especially a mature buck, and he's going to pattern you, essentially. Like, not to say that you can't get lucky. You can sit there over and over and over and over again and eventually shoot something, maybe. But it's more luck at that point and just, waiting on time. We just don't. We prefer not to hunt that way. We go right in there and we either make it happen or we screw it up and we learn a ton. But either way, that's just kind of how we peel the orange, I guess. Right.
So it sounds like you're probably you're not going you're not using these cameras necessarily for the game this year. In a lot of cases, you're just stacking the deck for years to come.
Yeah, I would say more so, and like that plays into that long-term trail camera strategy. We run probably 75% of our cameras on long-term approach. So that is that 6-month plan or that 8-month or whatever, where you just leave them there for an entire fall. And if we're scouting public land, we may hunt 8 or 9 different states, and we may have, 60 different areas that we scout or hunt in. And a lot of those spots that we scout, we may never even hunt that year. But if we leave a camera in there, we can figure out what was going on when we weren't there. And just learn an insane amount about the deer in that location and throughout different times of the fall. Maybe you set it up over a honey locust grove along the edge of a bedding area. You don't see anything for activity there until the first snowfall, and then all of a sudden it picks back up. You got to remember, when you're leaving a camera out there that long, the deer are becoming totally relaxed to its presence.
Sure.
They have no idea that it's there. After a couple of weeks, your scent is out of there. They've moved right back in, and they're behaving totally naturally in their bedding area, which is what you want them to be doing when you're observing them with a camera or with your eyeballs. It doesn't matter. You want them to be essentially caught off guard. You're getting pictures of them as they're naturally moving through their habitat, which is extremely valuable. And I think a lot of times when folks are checking their cameras every 2 weeks, you might be getting pictures of a buck, but if you're in there that frequently, he's going to know that you're there.
Gotcha.
Even if it's in the middle of the night, he's going to know. But that's so. I guess to answer your question, sorry I get long-winded on the deals, but
no worries.
To answer your question, we run them 75% of them all year like that, and then the other cameras we will run on the outskirts of bedding or somewhere that we can slide in there, and maybe it's where a staging area is located that connects 3 bedding areas, for example, and there's a couple scrapes and stuff in that staging area. It might not be quite close enough to the bedding to get on a buck during daylight, but a lot of those bucks are going to use that staging area out of those 3 bedding areas. So we'll put a camera in there to try to figure out which bedding area that buck is coming out of.
Gotcha.
And we'll hang that right now, and then we'll check it when we go in there to hunt. But that's another thing. We a lot of times are not going out to check cameras just to check cameras in the fall. We usually have some sort of a game plan, as in like we'll have a stand on our back or a potential setup idea close to that camera should we get pictures of something, and we're hunting that day. We will plan our camera check around our hunt. So if we have a couple hours, for example, to go check a camera, but not enough time to hunt, we're not even going to check it because we don't want to go put scent in there, then leave and come back 3 days later. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
We want to go in there and pull it, and if the intel is on it that we're looking for, we want to hunt that immediately before that deer can get back up there and smell that we've been in there.
I gotcha. Okay. Makes complete sense. How often do you think that plan works for you? Now, I'm not saying that you killed the deer. I'm just simply saying that the plan works. Oftentimes, I've hunted enough public to know that, it's hard to know, whether it's public or private. I'm just saying getting close or even
right.
seeing the deer.
I would say that it's worked at least a handful of times in the last few years for us, as far as getting in there and getting set up on the deer. The thing that you always got to remember, and this is kind of a cliche answer because you hear a lot of folks say this, but it really is true. The trail camera is one tool. It is one piece of your strategy. So you have to, when we're getting on these bucks with the use of trail cameras, a lot of times it's in a spot where we've previously scouted. We know the bedding. We know the different setups we want to get in for various winds and various conditions. Acorn year versus a non-acorn year, different crop rotations, whatever it may be. We've got all of that information going into our plan. And as we're going in, we're not just going in to check that camera. We're also going in to look for traditional buck signs, scrapes, fresh rubs leading out of the bedding, big tracks leading out of the bedding, all of those things. And then the camera is just part of that. The camera is like 1 out of 10 things that you're thinking about on that given day. But okay. Regardless, we treat the camera the same way as we would if we were going in there without a camera. We're not going into those spots unless we are planning to hunt them. Okay. So, no, we're not going in there and checking that thing unless we have a stand on our back or, a plan to go in there and hunt those bedding areas. And if we check it, there's no bucks on it. If we don't see any sign right there from bucks in the spot that we hung it, then we just push even further. We just go on in. Or we leave completely and go hunt a different location. But we are going in there with that mindset that we're ready to go if the intel is there.
So you're ready to do that at any point in time, whether you're hunting in Kentucky on September 3rd or November 15th in Iowa, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Same strategy all the time.
We're going in there.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. We're essentially, if we're getting into those sensitive areas closer to the bedding, basically anywhere other than just a destination food source that we have no plan to hunt because we're assuming that the buck's going to be nocturnal out there.
Right.
Or an area that's getting pounded with hunting pressure. Those areas we'll check frequently.
Sure.
Because we're never going to hunt them. But if it's anywhere close to where we plan to hunt and it's during the season, we're going to have a bow in our hand or a gun in our hand.
Right.
And we're going to be going in there with a purpose to set up and try to kill that deer if we get the intel that we need.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Because you're not going to get another, that's the thing especially with the biggest, oldest bucks on the property, they're just not going to give you very many chances. You got there's a lot of tricks and things that you can try that might occasionally work, but most of the biggest, oldest bucks get killed when they're coming through by surprise.
Right.
They're coming through. They don't expect you to be there. And you happen to be in that spot and catch them off guard. You catch them by surprise. And the only way that we've ever figured out to do that is to not leave our scent in there.
Right.
I mean, you're going into that location. You haven't been in there for 5 months. So you kind of have your route planned on your way in to scout these different exits, to scout these different maybe trail camera locations or whatever it is, checking for sign that's ultimately going to lead you to believe that there's a buck in that bedding area. And if you see that sign, then we're hunting it right then and not waiting.
Do you feel like a trail camera intel becomes less reliable the farther the calendar is in the year in terms of the hunting year, the hunting season? Does it become less relevant, I guess, in terms of what you're going to do?
As far as the short-term strategy goes,
yes,
potentially, yes.
Okay,
but not from the long-term standpoint. You can pick up some incredibly useful intel on some of those cameras on a long-term strategy at various times of the year. I mean, you can pick up interesting stuff after the hunting season. If you've got them out there running in late winter or whatever. The thing is just to try to get creative with them and put them out there with a purpose, don't just put them out there trying to get, random pictures of a buck. Put it in an area to try to get deer doing something, or maybe it's a community scrape, or maybe it's like a big signpost rub that's rubbed on like 4 or 5 sides right on the edge of the bedding area. Mm-hmm. We'll set the camera up there to try to monitor when those bucks are using that rub the most, and which bucks are in that area from which time frames.
Sure.
And then at the end of the year, you got all this data. You got 6 months worth of data to monitor within this bedding area so that you can adjust for situations down the road. Because that's the thing with most of these bedding areas, they're all situational. They're all seasonal in some regard. I mean, every once in a while you find one that there's just big bucks in nonstop, but that is not the norm. Most of the time, a buck will use a bedding area like that for a few days at a time or a couple weeks or something, and they're going to move on, and their pattern is going to change. And if you have a camera in there and you can figure out when that is without really disturbing it at all, then that's going to help you a ton. So I would definitely say that plays a big role with trail cameras. Always put them out with some sort of a purpose. Another example, like I was talking about a while ago, is those locust pods. Late season when the snow comes on, especially on public land, if you don't have access to a lot of ag crops or something, you're like, well, what am I gonna hunt over late season? What are the deer feeding on? Well, if you find natural browse or natural vegetation right next to their bedding area that is up above the snow that they're eating, mm-hmm. then you're in the game. So we'll switch a lot of our cameras over to locust pods or something. I mean, that's just one example,
Well, I think that's
towards the end of the season, just to see how their patterns, will change as snowfall comes, as cold weather comes, all that.
Yeah, I think that statement or that observation is relevant 365 days a year, especially when it comes to does. I mean, certainly, bucks are going to lose their mind sometime in October and regain it sometime in the start of December. But by and large, where they're at is dictated by their stomach. And I think that's a strategy that's often overlooked, by a lot of folks. Is that exactly what you're talking about, getting creative, especially when you don't have big food plots or a food plot to hunt, etc. It's just you just have to get creative, and those are the kinds of things that you can learn, like you guys did. I saw that. I watched your show where I think you guys had pictures up until I don't remember for sure, but I want to say it was late February that you guys had, pretty consistent pictures. It may have even been March when you guys were going to collect your stolen trail cameras.
Right.
But that was a great observation and something you wouldn't have probably, and maybe you already knew that, but to the casual observer, that should send up a red flag. That's something that you ought to pay attention to. Would you agree that it's something you ought to pay attention to year round? Obviously, it's more predictable in some areas than others. If you've got alfalfa or beans or something like that, it's a pretty good chance that if the leaves are green, then they're probably going to be on the green. But if you're hunting a big stretch of timber like you guys often do, and there's not ag fields like in Wisconsin, and you've hunted enough of Wisconsin now, there's not often the presence of an ag field in and around that public, hunting area.
Oh, yeah. And really, the more you can learn about these things, the easier it's going to be for you to reason with their behavior come hunting season. Like, especially a mature buck. The more that you learn about the big picture of what's going on in their area, no matter if it's through observation or through trail cameras or through just being out there and hunting or scouting, you're going to start to figure out why a buck is in a spot when he is.
Right.
And then you can anticipate for it for future hunts. And you're going to see your success go way up at that point. You're not just throwing, darts at a wall then and hoping that something sticks. You're really starting to understand intimately how those deer use the area. I mean, we'll see doe family groups use the same area all year long.
Right.
And in bed in similar locations. And a lot of people will look at that, and be like, I don't care about does, I want to shoot a buck or whatever. But man, if that's what your goal is, you better understand how those does use that area, because at some point a buck is going to be in there with them, and he's going to be bedded to monitor them during the rut.
Absolutely.
So you can pick up, to answer your question, you can certainly pick up. I mean, you can pick up on stuff in March and April from that regard, and just more overall information about the area and how the deer change. I mean, that's the interesting thing I find with these cameras that we run for long periods of time. It's just seeing how the deer will transition from one place, one food source, one type of behavior to the next, and how quickly it can change. That just that makes the case even more for being adaptable, situational hunter.
Right. There's a reason that they're doing everything that they're doing. In 8 out of 10 times, and maybe that's a little overstated, but I'm going to say somewhere north of 6 out of 10 times it's because of food. And then you can fill in the blanks with pressure and sex and all that other stuff. Predators and things like that, for the rest of the time. But by and large, it's food. And I've noticed that on the lease that I have, and the lease that I have covers, I don't even know anymore. It's gotten a little bit bigger here recently, but I want to say it's just about 2 miles from the top to the bottom. And it's just interesting how there's doe bedding areas that I had pretty well pegged this winter, and so I put cameras in and around those areas, or a camera in and around that area on food, and lo and behold, on that particular part of that property, there's just does for whatever reason. And I'm sure that there's buck sign in there, but for whatever reason, like you referenced earlier, they just show up at a different point in time. So there's a ton of information you can learn from them, and it's not always. I think we just get caught in relying on them too much for them to make our decision on where to sit.
Right.
Let me ask you this.
I would echo that.
What are your thoughts on the biggest mistakes that people make with regards to trail cameras?
I think they just check them too much. And it may be for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's because they are relying on too much, like you say. I mean, heck, it's fun checking the thing.
Yeah, it's like Christmas, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, it's fun going in there and checking them. So a lot of people have the tendency to be like, oh man, I got a few minutes after work and I want to do something fun, on my deer hunting property, but I don't have time to go hunting. Maybe they just want to run out there and check a camera. I get that, and I don't want to necessarily discourage people from doing that if they enjoy doing that. But I will say, if you're wanting to harvest a mature buck and that's what your priority is, then leave them alone. I mean,
exactly.
Leave them alone and start putting them in areas with a purpose.
With a purpose.
And really think about your strategy in checking them in relation to the days that you hunt. Like I said, we hardly ever check them just to check them, unless it's after the season and we're going to pull one of those cameras that's been soaking all fall.
Right. I think, yeah.
I just see people, they're just checking them too frequently, like they're leaving too much sense in there, and their intrusion is becoming consistent where the deer are beginning to pattern them.
Sure. I think you have to identify, like you said, you don't want to discourage anyone from having fun. And if what you want to do is check your trail cameras every 3 days or every week, then you go ahead and do it. By all means, we need more hunters in the woods. Period. Whether it's and I don't even care if it's not deer hunting. You know what I mean? But I think you have to identify your why, I guess, is the way I would determine, or I would phrase it, and just why is it that you're checking them, and what is your end goal, and understand that there's a cause and effect, and there's a equal and opposite action for your action, oftentimes when you enter the timber, and until you accept that, I think you can make life a lot harder for yourself when it comes to killing a mature animal. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Anything else that you can think of that you think is a detriment to using trail cameras?
Well, I think. We talked about it briefly there, where people are focusing more of their strategy on the camera than they probably should. But I would just reiterate that, like, there's woodsmanship in your scouting, in your overall strategy to how you hunt the property is, in my opinion, way more important than the camera. The camera is just one small piece in your toolbox. And I think if you treat it that way and you use it as a tool for specific situations, you'll have good luck with them. But I think a lot of folks see, just there's trail cameras everywhere nowadays. They are fun to check. I think they just buy them and they think, well, I don't need to learn how to hunt. I can just put these things out, and then they'll tell me when and where to hunt. When, in my experience anyway, that couldn't be further from the truth.
Right. I would agree with you. You mentioned earlier, and I'm going to sort of rabbit trail here for a bit, and we're getting close to taking enough of your time too. But you mentioned a camera being but just one of the reasons that you do what you do, maybe in a given situation. What are your top 5 things that you're looking for, and not just with respect to trail cameras? Let's assume that you've gotten a few pictures of a decent deer. What else is it that you're looking for before you're making a decision?
Oh, as far as like going in that day to hunt.
Yeah.
Okay, if we're going into a spot, first thing we're monitoring is the pressure. In public, we're looking for tire tracks, we're looking for boot tracks in and around that area.
Okay.
As we're moving closer. And the next thing we're looking for, and it's kind of a combination or a singular factor in this next group of things that I'll mention. I mean, you're looking for big tracks coming and going on exit trails out of those bedding areas. And you're looking for rubs coming and going out of those bedding areas. You're also looking for scrapes close to those bedding areas. Or, any type of deer sign. And as we start to sneak into them, we'll even run into bed, and that's how we know when we're getting really close. We'll even run into maybe a buck and we'll spook him, or like a smaller buck in a satellite bed. Mm-hmm. That's another thing that tips us off that we know we're getting close.
Sure.
But like I said, it could all depend on the situation that you're hunting. Some bedding areas may have 15 bucks in them. Some of them may have one buck.
Right.
And obviously the amount of deer sign left is going to be quite different in those two situations. So as we're going in, if the only thing we see is one set of big tracks going in and coming out on a trail, we're going to pay really close attention to that, because it could be a small bedding area that we're going in to hunt, and that could be the buck that you're after leaving his sign on that trail as he's going in or out of that bedding area. And if you set up on that exact trail and he does that again while you're sitting there, then you're in good shape, so long as you're close enough to where he's bedded to kill him in daylight.
Okay.
So you're sort of surmising all of those things as you're sneaking into one. And we won't hunt a spot if we don't have confidence in it with the sign. But I'm telling you, I've messed up several times going past that type of sign. Say you've got 3 bedding areas, that are stacked into an area. You're going to hit the first one first, obviously, then blow through it if you don't see the sign that you want. But oftentimes what happens is you get into the edge of that first bedding area early in the season before any hunting pressure has occurred, and you see a big rub, and then you see a set of big tracks right next to it, and you don't see nothing else. And that's it. There's not really a ton of sign. There's not a lot of those other, factors getting triggered in your mind. And what I've done several times is I've taken another 30 yards past that, and I've just been like, well, no, I'll burn this up. This isn't enough. I want something more, and I'll just head to bedding area number 2. And about 30 yards later, I'll blow the buck right out of there. So that, I've had that happen enough times now where I've started to just set up on what would look like a minimal amount of sign. But if it's fresh and if it's the right type of sign, if you're hunting a big buck, that's the deer that you're after. You're not really worried about the rest of the deer.
Right.
So, that's the one you're trying to kill. I mean, you're not worried about seeing 25 deer and sit. You're just worried about getting him close enough to shoot.
Right.
And so we're always looking at any one or all of those things put together as we're stalking into a bedding area. But don't walk by that stuff if you see it. Especially seems like anymore, especially with big tracks. And that's relative to the type of soil that they're in and, a number of different things. But if we see an abnormally large set of tracks in comparison to the other deer tracks around, within the general vicinity, and they're going in and coming out on the same trail or close to the same trail, and we're close to a bedding area, we're paying real close attention to that right there. And we're looking for a spot to set up.
It's interesting to me how often tracks come up in, not that our conversation is super intricate, but intricate conversations about deer hunting, setting up, hunting beds and things like that. Tracks are really a huge part of the equation, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yep. And you can't always read them. So that's why I said you really got to have an open mind as to what it is that tips you off to that buck being there before you spook him. But oftentimes, last year, one example, we were going into a bedding area, and it's not a big bedding area. It's one that might hold 1 or 2 bucks. And I was sneaking in there, and I cut a huge set of tracks coming out, and it just rained the day before, and it was fresh, like going out the day before. I took a few more steps up the trail, and I found what looked to be the same set of tracks going the other direction, super fresh. Okay. And I didn't see a rub. I didn't see a scrape. I didn't see much other deer sign at all, but I was 75 yards from the beds that we had scouted before. And it's a bedding area that's about half acre in size, and there was probably 20 beds in there when we scouted it.
Wow.
But that track was going straight for those beds, and I'm like, man, that's probably a buck that's in there, but for whatever reason, me and Jake being impatient probably, and us thinking like, well, we got 10 other bedding areas to look at. Let's go find one that's lit up with rubs and it's got a bunch of bucks in it. Well, we took another 25 steps, and I just happened to look up and spot the thing before he saw us. And I don't remember if you watched the videos from last fall, but I almost killed a really big buck on the ground with Jake that we stalked up on.
Yep, I remember.
Yeah, that was that deer.
Okay.
And he was walking when I tried to draw on him when he was at 10 yards in that thick brush on the ground, and he saw me. He was on that trail that I cut those tracks on. So if I would have set up on that trail to shoot that thing, I might have been in a much better spot to kill him.
How often would you say that happens, though?
Oh, more than you think.
I'm glad you said that.
More than I think, because I've had this happen now multiple times. It happened 3 or 4 different times last year alone. And over the course of my lifetime hunting, I've had it happen numerous times since I started paying attention to tracks and, rubs leaving a bedding area or a big scrape leaving a bedding area or whatever.
Right.
Like, man, if you find that sign and you think there's a possibility he's in there, it might be best for you to just hunt. And if you don't see him, then push further in the next time. But if you go further than that, then you burn it up. It's like you can't go back. So that's one thing that I've learned more over the years, is that if you see that type of thing, it's best that you just set on it.
Right.
You may only see one deer, but he might have been the right one. And in that particular instance, if Jake and I would have sat on that sign, he may have came by on that trail at 10 yards, and we would have been in the proper setup instead of trying to stalk him through thick brush and grass like that.
Right. Okay. Makes complete sense. As long as I've gone off the rails on the whole trail camera thing here, you mentioned also rubs and scrapes present in a bedding area. At what point in time do you really start to hammer on or not hammer on those, but really start to pay attention and start looking for those? And I guess let me rephrase the question. At what point in time do those, scrapes and rubs start to really mean something to you?
As soon as they start leaving them, which is, in September in a lot of cases. It really all comes down to the proximity to the bedding, because you got to think about this too. As soon as they lose their velvet, they're starting to rub in September. But by November 1st, they've went through the majority of the pre-rut already. Their velvet's been off for a month and a half, and there's rubs all over the woods. So it starts to get harder to narrow down. But I've noticed, like, hunting states in late September, early October, especially when you're running into fresh rubs close to bedding areas, that's when we're paying real close attention to them. Okay. You know, it just because that's letting us know there's a very good chance there's a buck in that bedding area during the, and think about it too, during that time of the fall, they're not moving as much. You know, they're not traveling as far at night even, because they're not getting into the whole rut thing yet.
Right.
As October progresses on, you start seeing bucks show up on your camera that you've never seen before at 4 a.m.
Right.
You know, and that's because they're making wider loops, you know, marking areas and keeping an eye on multiple doe groups. And as they're doing that, they're marking stuff up. So they're leaving more rubs and scrapes and stuff just all over the landscape. And they're all doing that. But in late September, when they're leaving a bunch of rubs right on the edge of the bedding area, that's just letting you know, like, those bucks are probably not real far, because they're homebodies that time of year. They don't travel very far, number one. Number two, their velvet hasn't been off that long, so they can't have rubbed as many trees. You know, they just don't have time on their side to leave that much sign. But as far as scrapes go, we're looking at scrapes the same way, especially bedding area scrapes, or scrapes that are in staging areas linking two bedding areas together. And we're hunting those as soon as they start opening up. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a car hood scrape that's just tilled up. You know, if there's a scrape that's hit close to a bedding area and it's just been hit one time, or there's a track in it that's super fresh and you can tell that the licking branch has been messed with in September, for example, we're going to hunt it.
Really?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Most of the time, what we found anyway with scrapes in particular is they're usually located at some sort of a trail hub. They won't just go walk over to a tree and scrape at it very often. Most of the time, it's got to be on or really close to a hub of trails where multiple, you know, deer travel corridors are coming together. That's one reason why they're marking that spot, you know, is because that's a way for them to communicate with other deer, maybe in other bedding areas or within the same bedding area, whatever. It's just a social area. Right.
Exactly. I was just meeting with a landowner, you know, in Wisconsin here, just meeting with a guy that had just bought a property from me, and you know, we were talking about that same thing, and I said, you almost have to think of it, those scrapes and you know, rubs, as an advertisement. They're not going to put an advertisement in an area. You're not going to put a billboard on this slow, out of the way street, because it's not going to be very fruitful for you. You're going to put it on a heavily used, you know, travel corridor. So, and that's what they're going to do. And it's not just little bucks or big bucks. It's all bucks. They all have that rationale. I mean, that's just what they're going to do. So I think it's important to say that, at least I believe it's important to say that if you're going to mess around with mock scrapes or anything like that, it's still, you can, you know, build the best mock scrape with whatever, you know, tools and sense that you've got. If it's not placed in the right strategic area, like we're talking about, a hub, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference.
Well, you know Ted Miller, right?
I do.
I mean, he's the king of making, you know, mock scrapes and mock signposts and horizontal rubs and all that stuff. And people are always like, man, how do you get so many deer on your horizontal rubs and your mock scrapes? And Ted, I've been out there with him. Like, it is so simple. He finds a trail crossing in the woods where there's already an established scrape or already a licking branch broken, and he puts it right there.
And I'll be darned, it works.
All it's doing is just sweetening the spots that they're already using.
Right. And in his case, and I'm not taking anything away from him. He's just not overthinking things. He's just using common sense and being practical. And for the style of hunting that Ted does, it works out great, especially to sell film, etc. I mean, it's genius in my opinion. But it's not as hard as people make it out to be. I would be willing to bet, having fielded those questions for a while, I would be willing to bet if you don't get them weekly, you probably get them daily. Like, when's Ted Miller going to talk about his horizontal rub? It's really not that hard, and it's like a lot of things. We make things harder than they need to be a lot of times, but still, Ted is really, really, he's a good woodsman, first of all, and he recognizes the value of an opportunity when he sees a situation like that, like you said, like a scrape that's already there, that's already been used. It's clearly used year after year. It's a great place to put one.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned licking branches a while ago. That's another thing you gotta pay real close attention to. And especially in early season, before their testosterone is really cranking, and they're pawing the dirt, they're still hitting those licks because those are in those hub locations. I've filmed deer hit licking branches in the middle of summer, where there'd be a car hood scrape in late October. And they're walking right by the same exact spot. That's because it's located, like you said, on a travel corridor next to a bedding area. It's just a social area where there's deer frequenting often.
Right. I don't know if you've seen any of our stuff on using Clint McCoy, Dr. McCoy, using blue paracord on a licking branch, and getting if he's made a mock scrape or something like that on a hub, he'll use. Have you heard him talk about any of that or seen any of his social media posts? Yeah.
Man, I've seen guys use rope too, and that works really well.
Yep. Yeah. I have used the blue rope, and in Wisconsin we can't bait. Well, you can. It's just dependent on how much you want to afford. It's not legal. So I really adopted that method, and I've got one spot it's actually on a 2-track, but it's a travel hub, where there's like 7 different trails come together there, and I built a mock scrape the size of the hood of your car, and it turns out it's a great place to get summertime pictures, and it works like a charm. It really does.
Yeah.
And more often than not, they're not going to paw at the ground this year. People, I think they get misled at times or misinformed. Don't look for a whole lot of, dirt turned up on the ground at this point in time. You got to pay attention, like you said, to the licking branch. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's what we're looking for right now more than anything. It's just those licking branches broken along field edges or along trail crossings or whatever.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely a great way to figure out. At this time of year, you're just simply taking inventory. At least I am, and you're not gonna probably be hunting that deer in that spot in 2 months, but it's still an indication that there's, as Clint calls it, a proof of life, and a good way to do it, and a good way to do it legally, I guess, at least in Wisconsin. So,
sure.
Speaking of that, I just it made me remember that I haven't checked my cameras in a while. I got a couple Spartan cameras out, and I just checked. I just actually sent you a picture of
oh yeah, I see him.
of a really nice 8 that I'm familiar with. I've known him for 2 years now, and he probably was just hitting that. You can see where I put that what I did is took a vine and took a fence post staple and nailed it to a tree, and then that vine still has moisture coming out of it nearly a year later. Although it's just about done, but I've got, if you were to zoom in on that picture, you can see that there's a couple zip ties at the end there, and I've got that blue rope, and I've got numerous videos of deer coming up and just chewing and gnawing on that rope. But that's because I've used it as a scent wick as well.
Right. Yeah, that looks awesome.
Yeah, it's been a fun little experiment. Again, it's not anywhere where I'm going to hunt, but it does give me. I guess it brings up a good conversation piece in that is, how much stock do you put in? Let's see, when did that deer come through? I didn't even look at that. That deer came through at 8:50 in the evening. Probably safe to say he's bedding there relatively close, right?
Yep.
And
that's good. Interesting point. I think I know where you're going with this. Go ahead.
But the problem with that is I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's just a hope and a dream at this point. And I hate to be so blunt about it, but it really means nothing. That deer can end up a mile north, 2 miles north, south, east, west, whatever he wants to do. It's just that, they're all playing nice right now and not shooting at each other, so to speak, because they're not chasing after women. And we all know what happens when that happens, and it can all fall apart. Again, it's a good indication of proof of life, and that's really about it. Would you agree with that?
I would. But if you have that camera set up there in the fall, and it's cell cam, so you're not intruding in there, it's sending you pictures.
Right.
If you have that camera set up there in the fall and you have a deer do that same thing, hard horn or hard antlers coming out of that bedding areas, and it's at that time of day, right, at dusk, and that he's bedding close by, and you can go in there and hunt him.
Yep, absolutely. And that would be that. So let's just really quick, and then I'll let things wind down here. You get that picture on the 15th of October. It's a different story. I think now you're in the chips in terms of being relatively close to his bed. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and one thing I'll say is a lot of folks will get a picture like that that's like right on the verge of daylight, that's close to a bedding area per se. If you're going in there and you check that camera and you get that picture, hunt it immediately. If you're sitting at home and you get that camera or you get that picture, sold to you, texted or emailed to you, hunt it immediately.
Right.
That's really it doesn't matter whether it's a cell camera or a camera that you have to go out there and check. If you can get to that camera location without spooking that buck out of the bedding area, then hunt him immediately. A lot of people make that mistake. They will get pictures of bucks through October and they won't hunt until the rut. Well, then they go in there and the buck is left.
He's long gone.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to hunt that thing immediately because he's there and when you can kill him.
Right.
It's one of those common sense type things, and I've learned that the hard way too by overthinking stuff. I mean, that's my worst enemy every year is overthinking stuff.
We all do it though. I mean, we just, I just were disposed to it probably because we're men, but
yeah. I mean, if the thing is there, if it doesn't matter when it is, if it's deer season and the thing is there, then you got to go in there and hunt it. Even if it's a little bit after dark or whatever, if you know the bedding area that he's in, go in there and hunt that bedding area because you know where he is. Like, that's the most important piece of information that you can have.
Right.
That's the hardest part of it all. It's like figuring out where the heck these things are at. And if you get tipped off to that, then go in there and hunt them. Forget about whether they're nocturnal or not. All of them behave nocturnally. But at least in most situations that I've seen, mature bucks will get up and move around their bedding areas within their safe zone during daylight at all times of the year.
Sure.
including hunting season. Now, sometimes they may get further than others, but there ain't no sense in waiting on him, because he could easily move in a week.
Sure.
You gotta hunt them when they're there.
Absolutely. I think the underlying message there is if you're going to check them often, you're probably going to diminish the amount of big mature deer that you get, and just know that going in. And then the other thing that I think I've picked up on you saying is, if you're going to go check it, do it with intent. And that intent needs to be, if I get what it is that I am looking for on this camera, then I need to be ready to act, not in the rut, but now, because they're there now, right?
Yep, that's right.
I'm not as dumb as I look. Oh, you're so spot on. We make this way harder than it is, and it's I do these podcasts now year after year, and it's I'm a slow learner. I've got an 8-pointer that this will be my third year going after him, and I've written it all down, so now I can just look back and remind myself how stupid I am at times. But you have to understand that what they're doing up until November 1st typically is or maybe October 15th, whatever the date is, typically revolving around food or pressure, and after that, throw it all out the window. It's a crapshoot.
Yep, that's right.
Any final thoughts or marching orders that you have on trail cameras, or anything else? Anything else you want us to know about the hunting public?
No, not really. We're getting ready to come out with a new website soon, and probably we'll have a lot more THP merch available soon. Hopefully come late July and August. That'll all be stuff that's going on, and we'll be cranking a lot of scouting content. We're going to be doing some mapping whitetails stuff here in the month of July and August. That should be pretty cool. But yeah, everything's trucking along with us. We're just ready to go deer hunting.
Well, there you have it. My conversation with Mr. Aaron Warbritton from the Hunting Public. If you don't know who the Hunting Public is and haven't caught any of their YouTube channel shows, you probably should crawl out from under the rock and subscribe to their YouTube channel. As he said, they're going to have a new website coming out here in the near future, so I would assume you can watch for that on social media or on their YouTube channel. They'll be rolling that out here sometime this summer, a little bit later. With that, I'll begin to close out the show for today. Thanks for tuning in. We want to thank Ozonics for their help in helping us to put this on and bring this to you. If anyone has an idea of something that they'd like to hear, or a person that they'd like to hear from, don't hesitate to email myself, Jason at whiteknuckleproductions.com, and I'll be more than happy to reach out to that person. Coming up here in the next few weeks, we're going to close out talking about trail cameras and transition into, I'm not sure yet, but we've got a couple guests lined up that will likely be talking about some hunting strategy and things of that nature. So I'll begin to close out the show for today. Thanks again for listening. Jason.